Welcome, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be with you virtually at this time. My name is Rabbi Daniel Michaelberg. To my friends at Temple Israel, they all know me, but to my new friends, what a pleasure it is to meet you in this creative setting. I serve Temple Israel, which is on Prince of Wales Drive. I have been here now a little over a year. My story is that I'm the Canadian traveling rabbi and that my travels began in Vancouver and off to Toronto, and now most recently here in Ottawa since July of 2020. Let me just share two things. Certainly, this is not the first year that I imagined, and that brings us to our conversation today. And that there are often very typical things that one can imagine in a first year. A pandemic typically isn't on that list. What a learning experience it has been to have these difficult times with my community, but also what a growth and what a building experience it has been, even in these times of hardship, to get to know one another, to seek hope and inspiration, even in times of struggle, to really recognize that we're all family, and also to build bridges. And I mean that sincerely. Even in this time of disconnect, it's been a time for us in creative settings such as these to build connections. And what a pleasure it has been to meet my new friend, Gary Vandermeer, to get to know one another, to share our experiences, to collaborate, to find ways that we can rebuild together. And it is with that hope that we come together today to share our connection and to use our text in order to look ahead, in order to together seek inspiration, in order to even build relationship.
Thank you, Rabbi Daniel. And I'm really delighted to meet those of you at Temple Israel. My name is Gary Vandermeer, and I'm on a first name basis with the parishioners at St. John the Evangelist Anglican Church on Elgin Street in downtown Ottawa. And I've been here since the beginning of February. I was ordained in 1993, and I served a number of parishes in Toronto before coming to Ottawa. And I'm actually no stranger to interfaith friendships. In my previous church, we developed an intentional friendship with City Shul and the Rabbi Elise Goldstein, and also an intentional friendship with the Islamic Information and Dawah Center and Imam Shabir Ali. And we formed an intentional friendship between our congregations. And that became a deeply committed friendship, especially following the acts of terrorism in Quebec and in Pittsburgh and in New Zealand. And we would actually be seen out in coffee shops, and the humor would come of a rabbi and an imam and a priest walking into a bar. And we reveled in that humor. But I want to talk about my approach to interfaith friendship. First of all, I think it's self-evident, but I think I want to say it, that this is not about conversion, about seeking to convert each other. And so I want to say what I think we're doing. One part is essentially protective and the other part is blessing. So by protective, I mean, I hope that we can know each other so well and befriend each other so that should there be times of tragedy, we already know each other and we really can support each other. And secondly, I hope that it will help us to move past the stereotypes that people can have of, all Christians or all Jews. And now for the blessing part. The first aspect of that is being with each other is really a part of being interested in the world. And we believe that God isn't just the God of all Christians or the God of all Jews, but the God of all creation. And so being with you reminds us that we're to be open. And the second part of that is that talking to you will actually help us to become better Christians. And by that, I mean that your outside eyes help us to see different parts of our tradition in new ways. You help us to be more intentional Christians by noticing things and sharing out of your tradition in a way that gets us paying to things that haven't been on our radar. And I hope that at a deep level, that will mean that we feel that we really are family. So my personal thought about that is that, number one, we share a number of the same texts. Number two, we have overlapping but quite different interpretations of our texts. And number three, we come to surprisingly compatible approaches to life. And I hope that as we talk about our texts today, that you will have that sense as well.
Amazing. And I love that we're both coming from Toronto, so we could share our love-hate relationship with the big bad city. That maybe that'll come out in our in our text studies as well.
For sure. And over to you for our first text that we'll be talking about.
Amazing. So as I was thinking about this really important question of texts for inspiration, of texts that have really provided comfort in these difficult times, I went to a less traditional text, and I think it'll become clear as I elaborate. I'm going to be reading from Exodus chapter 18, verse 8. In the Jewish culture, this comes from Parashat Yitro, so the section of Torah that looks at Yitro, who is Moses' father-in-law. Again, it's Exodus 18, 8. And just to put this in context, immediately preceding, the Israelites found themselves as slaves in the wilderness. And they are now free. And they have crossed the Sea of Reeds. And on the one hand, this is a joyous new beginning, that they can leave everything behind that we associate with slavery. But on the other hand, they actually don't know where they're going. They have to sincerely take a leap of faith. It would be a fair statement to say that they are wandering and they are lost. And in fact, it will take them 40 years of wandering before they get to the land of promise. And I often like to share, sometimes it feels like we continue to wander. A question that I often get is, why did it take so long? That even on foot, it shouldn't have taken 40 years to get from Egypt to the promised land. But in fact, as we all know, often with our journeys, it's not about the destination, rather it's about the travels. It's about the process. It's about how do we get from here to there. And the Israelites had a lot to learn on their travels. And that's where we find ourselves. This is really the beginning of those travels. In fact, in this same Torah portion, we're not going to read, but it will lead to the receiving of the Ten Commandments. It will lead to the receiving of these holy words from God, which is certainly a pivotal moment. We talk in the Jewish tradition that every piece of Torah, where it falls, has significance. Nothing is by accident. And so the fact that this Torah portion is leading into the pivotal moment of the Ten Commandments, that in itself is core. That in itself offers us incredible wisdom. And so let me read these words. Moses then recounted to his father-in-law everything that the Eternal had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had befallen them on their way, and how the Eternal had delivered them. And Yitro rejoiced over all the kindness that the Eternal had shown Israel when God delivered them. Blessed be the Eternal, who delivered you from the Egyptians, from Pharaoh, who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Eternal is greater than all gods. Yes, by the result of their very schemes against the people. And Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to partake of the meal before God with Moses' father-in-law. And the next day, Moses sat as magistrate among the people, while the people stood about Moses from morning until evening. But when Moses' father-in-law saw how much he had to do for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing to the people? Why do you act alone, while all the people stand about you from morning until evening?" And Moses replied to his father-in-law, "It is because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, it comes before me, and I decide between a man and his neighbor, and I make known the laws and teachings of God." But Moses' father-in-law said to him, "The thing you are doing is not right. You will surely wear yourself out, and these people as well, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You represent the people before God, you bring the disputes before God, and enjoin upon them the laws and the teachings, and make known to them the way that you are to go, and the practices that they are to follow. And you shall also seek out from all the people capable men who fear God, trustworthy men who spurn ill gotten gain. Set these over them as chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Have them bring every major dispute to you, but let them decide every minor dispute themselves. Make it easier for yourself and let them share the burden with you. And if you do this, and God so commands you, you will be able to bear up, and all these people too will go home unwearied. And Moses heeded his father in law and did just as he had said. And so I share these words that might not be the most typical or the most expected verses to really share, to respond to our crisis, to respond to these pandemic times. But I want to draw out a couple points, because there are days where I think all of us have felt like Moses. All of us have needed that Yitro. So first of all, we look to Moses, and Moses was carrying this incredible weight. Moses was carrying this incredible burden, and I think it's fair to say that he was approaching a breakdown, that there was no way that he could carry this by himself on his shoulders. But interestingly, it wasn't Moses who recognized that he was in trouble. Moses needed the help of an outside source. Moses needed the help of his father in law to help him recognize that what he was doing was not okay, that he was too stuck in his ways, that doing things how we always do things would not actually necessarily work in this case. In fact, it could lead to breakdown of sorts. And how fascinating that it was his father in law. I don't know what relationships all of us have with our in laws, but they might not be the first people we go to for advice. And yet, in this case, it is this outside traditional source. It is this source that is relatively new to Moses that is able to open his eyes, is able to help him see things that he wasn't able to see before, is able to help him recognize that there are new ways of doing things, maybe even better ways of doing things, things that he hadn't recognized before that are going to help him go in a new way. And I think I can safely say that for both of our communities, in those immediate days of pandemic times, traveling right to today, we've recognized for a host of reasons, our norms are not going to work, and that we are going to need to break new ground. We're going to need to do so quickly. And as we do so, that is how we're going to emerge from this place of being lost. That is going to be how we are going to trailblaze. That's how we're going to be able to imagine. Let me share with you a brief story. Temple Israel has many strengths. Technology, not one of them. And how interesting it was when the pandemic hit and suddenly we recognized, wow, we can't gather together in person. We're going to need to look to technology that we fear in order to find our way forward. And so, even though this was brand new to us, even though we didn't exactly know what we were doing, even though we felt a weight just like Moses, we took that leap. We reimagined, we listened to outside advice, we got creative. And needless to say, a year later, I would actually say technology is one of our strengths. Thank goodness we got that outside advice. Thank goodness we broke down those fears and were able to go in new pathways, blending tradition with that which is new. And that has been a source of hope. That's been a source of creativity. I would even say that has been a source of inspiration. And so from this place of being lost, this place of wandering, we've found a source of comfort and a new way to make meaning.
Well, thank you for that. This is a passage that, of course, is known to us. It's one we read as well. And we have a companion piece in our Christian sacred texts in a book called the Acts of the Apostles about the appointing of 70, and they were to assist. And we call them deacons. And the ministry of deacons has returned to the Anglican tradition over the past probably 25 years. And so we have a deacon at St. John's, the Reverend Carolyn DeCrow, and the deacon's role is, some of it's in the liturgy. It's particularly to read the gospel and to take parts in the service of the Eucharist. But the main part is to bring an awareness of the needs of the wider community into the gathered community of worshipers. And so I have not served with a deacon before in my previous ministries. And so I've really sensed the richness of it, especially in this time when, we can be so focused inward on the things that we're finding hard that we'll forget that other people are having a hard time too. And we might not even have the energy or bandwidth to respond. And so to have a few people that are dedicated to making sure that we don't leave anyone out has been the role of the diaconal ministry in our church tradition. And I think we draw that, with honesty and sincerity out of how Moses did that.
Amazing. I mean, it certainly also speaks to the importance of delegating and recognizing that we can't do it all alone.
Yeah.
And also in these times, we have certainly recognized that we have shared responsibility and that everybody can lend a helping hand, but that on nobody's shoulder is it to do it all. And in fact, that's a core principle in our wisdom, that for each of us we're responsible to play a part, but for nobody they should feel that it's all upon them, and all the more important in times of crisis like we're in now.
So one of my learnings about this at this time has been that, yes, we have designated people who have it as their mantle to do that for us. But I am seeing new people stepping forward because they see a gap and they want to help. And it is the same kind of need that's being addressed. But we have a different slant on our needs in the time of the pandemic. And so new faces and new voices, and if to the extent that we're inclusive and open and discerning, who might be good in roles, it's actually really a time of enriching what we're able to do as a community.
Absolutely. I think we've learned, actually, in the same way that Moses has learned to open his eyes to the people all around who are able to help, to support, to share. Those are certainly lessons that we've learned now. And the interesting thing in these pandemic times is that we've been relying on different skills that we have been in times before. So in terms of the religious work that we do, it's not actually traditional religious work, in that we relied on drivers to go home to make deliveries. We've relied on our more useful people that have had tech skills that, the two of us older folks have not had ourselves. We've needed to look beyond our borders, meaning outside of Ottawa, in order to bring in that expertise and to really learn how to be the best that we can be. I would even say there's a term that's been going on around now, COVID silver linings. There are things that we've been able to, there are actually positive things that have come out of this. And one of this has been learnings like this. Granted, we're neighbors, but we've been able to learn from people who are outside the city, and to bring them in with the power of Zoom as if they're next door. And how amazing to be able to learn from them and to seek inspiration from these sources.
I'd like to segue from there into the silver linings that I hope we'll see in the text that I've chosen. And the text that I've chosen it's Romans chapter 8. And especially for the benefit of you members of the synagogue who won't know at all what that is, the other text from Exodus is a shared one with us, but this one will be new to you. So I'll do a bit of an introduction to situate it before I read it. In our Christian scriptures, the oldest actual texts are letters to church communities founded by Paul the Apostle. And so I want to tell you about him. He was known as Saul of Tarsus, and the Paul part is just the Latin version of his name. He appears on the scene about 15 years after the death and departure of Jesus. And by his own telling, and also by the account of Luke, who is the author of the book that tells of his story, the Acts of the Apostles, he was a Pharisee, and he was educated at the school of Gamaliel in Jerusalem. And he became a persecutor of the first followers of Jesus. And the way the Acts account tells it, he got letters from the high priest in Jerusalem to go to the synagogues in Damascus because he wanted to arrest followers of the way, as it was called then. The word Christians didn't exist yet. And presumably those were people that were Jews as well as proselytes who would attend the synagogue on the Sabbath. And then on the next day, they would meet in people's homes to celebrate the meal that Jesus shared that we now call the Eucharist. And his intent was to persecute these people. Anyways, on his way to Damascus, he had a dramatic conversion. He saw a blinding light, and he was struck down, and he heard the voice of Jesus speaking to him. And he was literally blinded. And there was a Christian man named Ananias who came to pray with him and heal him. And from there, Saul, or as we also know him, Paul, went on to study, and then he appears on the scene as this great founder of church communities. But that Damascus Road experience, and you could put quotes around it, we actually talk about that when someone has a dramatic conversion experience. We call it a Damascus Road experience, led to him founding Christian communities around the Mediterranean basin. And he did not found the community in Rome. Other followers of Jesus did that. But he wrote a long letter to them to commend himself to them in an intention to visit them as part of further journeys that he had planned. I should add that I've chosen this section from a writing of Paul because not all Christians profess to like him very much. And there are two reasons. Number one is he has time-bound attitudes, such as about the place of women in leadership in the church. And we have come to see things very differently in our time. But another significant reason is people criticize him for creating a theological system which is about Jesus's divinity, and it moves us as followers further away from the life of Jesus and what he taught, and into a different theological place. And so people have difficulties with Paul, and I've deliberately chosen from him because there are amazing things in every person, and we need to see those silver linings and those gifts, even in people we sometimes disagree with. So the text that I've chosen is so that we can have a closer look at him and find a passage that would relate to the pandemic. And so I've chosen Romans chapter 8, 10 verses. And I'm going to read them to you from the version that we use in our church. He's writing, remember, to the Romans, people who have never met him, the members of the Christian congregation in Rome. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that is about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now, and not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we do not know how to pray as we ought, but that very Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words. And God, who searches the heart, knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God.
Wow.
So as I said, this will be completely unfamiliar to you. I know that some Jews have studied some of the early Christian texts, but I think for the most part, you may never have heard that before, and it may even surprise you. Let me say a few things about it and then come to what I am holding on to out of this passage. So you'll recognize that this is eschatology. That's the theological word for looking ahead to the end of history, the end of time. And Christian sacred texts have many passages of eschatology. And I know that the Hebrew texts also have some, but we have quite a few. And these texts tend to make people uncomfortable because there are the people who are annoyingly predictive about what end times are going to look like and what current event is leading to them. And for the most part, our tradition is inclined to regard ourselves as already in the new age, that what happened to Christ in that early period puts us already into those end times and a new age. But in any case, I don't know how you deal with eschatology, but I did want to address that and say that's what this is. And then there are some points here that I want to highlight. Paul talks about the creation being in labor pains. And in this year of the pandemic, I think that we actually saw that quite literally. And what we saw was that with the closure of factories all around the world, suddenly there was less pollution, the air quality improved, and we had a tangible sense of how filthy we have made the world. There were documented stories of wildlife in our cities, goats going through villages in England and foxes and coyotes in the main streets of Toronto. And so we had a sense that with people staying indoors, nature actually was coming in to live with us. And in a way, maybe we have forgotten that nature has been with us always. And maybe in our day-to-day breathing of the air we breathe, we've forgotten how the air really could be in our lungs. And so there was a silver lining early on in the pandemic of discovering, my goodness, look what we've done to the earth. We actually have an experience to show us. Paul continues to say that we ourselves are in labor pains. He is connecting that to the ends of time and to Christ. But what I hear in it is that we are not separate from the creation, that what we human beings are not sort of standing apart and looking on, made in God's image and therefore to dominate it. We are part of the earth. We are creatures. There is so much that does not separate us from, say, for example, the primates with whom we share so much DNA. We are part of what is happening to the earth, and it is happening to us. And that sense of we whatever happens to the earth is happening to us really struck me in this past year. Paul then goes on to say we need to be hopeful, and that if you can see what you're hoping for, that's kind of just prediction. It's to be able to hope when you can't see the outcome. And I have to say how often over this past year I've felt that, that I don't know what it's going to look like. There's this prediction that things will go back to normal, and then other people say, no, things will never go back to normal. We will never do as we've done before. And that ripples through restaurants and physical fitness and all kinds of aspects of human existence, that whether it will be the same or whether it will change. And I think it's happening internally too, that with each lockdown, people say, how much more of this can I take? And we find that we're at a place of drained exhaustion that we haven't felt in other settings in our life. Yeah, maybe in crisis we felt it, but not a gnawing, ongoing, I don't know what to do with this. And I hear people saying that they feel that now. The last thing that Paul talks about is how the times come where we don't know how to pray. And I want to take that quite literally to say, we haven't been in our church for over a year now. We've experimented and learned just as you had, and I have to say I have had lots of fun with learning how to do these new things. But I know that it's not the same as being gathered, and that even when we try to make it special and we add extra things in a video or in a Zoom, it is not the same as being with your people in community and loving your neighbor as yourself. It's different. Sometimes it feels lesser, and some of our people have a hard time connecting to doing online liturgy. It really throws us back onto our resources of personal devotion. And there are people who do personal prayers every day, and there are other people that's fallen away for them, and they don't have that foundation on which to live in connection with God. And they're finding they need to do that again. They need to figure out how to have times of personal devotion with the Creator. And so that's maybe an opportunity that we recognize something that we've faded from and that we want to have back. Now, when Paul says the Spirit intercedes to give us the words we don't know how to have, in a way, it's we don't have our liturgical prayers to carry us for some things, and we actually believe that God will help us to have the words we need to have to be connected with the divine. So those are the four things I want to highlight. The earth in labor pains, us as part of it, we are not separated from it. We try to live in hope in unpredictable times. And in our worship and in our personal devotion, God is supplying to us the ways that we can be connected to God.
Wow. So there are a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, to give permission to my community just to share that I think we're at a disadvantage in that our Christian friends are more familiar with Moses than we are with Paul. And so just to say out loud, this is sort of one of the few times that I've had the opportunity to look at Paul, and so what a great opportunity it is. But just to give permission to my community that it's okay that this is new to you, and that's how we learn as we really embark on these different texts. I mean, there are a few things that come to mind as I hear your important words. First of all, it's not lost on me to have two men reflecting on labor pains. We're not the best people to reflect on that, but certainly as labor pains are described to me, that they sound, coming from a place of deep pain, of wondering, will this ever pass? Being in a sense of urgency and a sense of I might even say despair in really longing for this baby to emerge already. And I think metaphorically we can certainly look to these difficult times with that metaphor. Jewishly, the phrase that we often use in Hebrew is gam ze ya'avor, meaning this too will pass. And it's actually imagery that we see in much of our tradition, in our customs. The idea of breaking the glass at a wedding actually comes from a similar place, in that at a wedding, even at this place of ultimate joy, we break a glass because we know that in our moments of ultimate joy, we recognize that won't be how things will always be, and there will be much more difficult times. But conversely, in these difficult times, we know that this too will pass, that better days are ahead. And certainly as I listen to your words, they're a reminder to me, and they've certainly been part of my theology and ideology, is that even as we find our in a place of desperation, that we can have hope and courage that this too will pass, that this is not forever, and that we will emerge from this, and we will emerge from this into a place of strength. You asked about sort of our imagery of end of days, and sort of where do we sit in Judaism with those thoughts. This is better articulated in Christian ideology, but certainly in the Reform movement, the two things that we talk about are, number one, is this idea of a Garden of Eden, that once things were perfect and everything was all right, and our world reflected those values that we aspire for. but that we were cast away from that garden to a place where there are deep fractures, and that we work towards a better day. We work towards restoring that sense of perfection. And that in the reform movement, we talk less about redemption and more about a redemptive age, and recognizing, actually going back to my text, that everything that we do matters. And it's important that we go in the direction of repair. In Hebrew, the term is tikkun, that we often see in the term tikkun olam, meaning to fix the world. And recognizing that it is especially in these times of desperation when our actions matter, whether it's our thoughts, our words, the things that we do, they work us towards emerging from this place of being lost, this place of being desperation, and help us to connect to a better time.
Well, I see the silver lining in being able to talk to you at this time about this. So thank you so much for actually commenting on the eschatology part as well. I have heard the phrase "this too shall pass." In fact, I had a role model priest in my early when I was just ordained, who would often say that, and he would then remind me that yes, and I'm going to say it when you're having a great day too. So that sense of perspective that we are going, where we are now is not where we will stay, but what we do now in the moment really does matter. So
also thinking about your the imagery of this whole experience has focused us on our human nature, on our strengths, but also our vulnerabilities. And it will certainly leave us humble. And we will never again take for granted simple things like shaking a hand, offering a hug, sitting together for worship. Your words have certainly, have certainly grounded me in making sure that we don't just let this experience go, and that we stay humbled, we stay gratitude, we stay gratified, and we stay open and aware to the blessings that are near and far, even in a time of pandemic.
And we now turn to you, the congregation of Temple Israel and the congregation of St. John the Evangelist, and invite your input and involvement. We've taken two texts today, and we hope that the way we've talked about them will help you to think about them in new ways. We certainly welcome your input if you would like to tell us about your thoughts about these texts. But we are going to meet again in a more interactive setting to talk about two new texts. We're going to choose both of these texts from our shared tradition so that everyone has a familiarity with them. And I'm going to tell you about the text I'm going to choose and encourage you to study it, and Daniel will do the same. So I have chosen Isaiah chapter 55. This will be well known to our congregation of St. John the Evangelist as one of our Easter Eve readings. And so I would encourage you to read the whole chapter and think about it.
And I'll be presenting Psalm 121 for our Jewish people. We recognize it by the Hebrew Esa Einai. I lift up my eyes to the heavens. And as we do, we really recognize that this is a psalm of faith. It's a psalm that we typically recite at funerals, but also at life cycle events and pivotal moments such as these, reminding us that it's in these desperate times, it is faith that keeps us strong and gives us the courage to go forward.
So we invite you to join us. We are going to meet on Wednesday, May 26th at 7:30 p.m. on Zoom. We hope that you have had a chance to digest this video, but the evening on May the 26th will be entirely interactive as we talk about our texts, and we invite you to weigh in as well. We'll each talk about our texts and situate them, and then we'll all have a chance to talk about them. If you would like to participate, we'd ask you to pre-register by contacting either of us by email so that we can include you in the Zoom invitation. So again, that date is Wednesday, May 26th, 7:30 p.m. And we welcome you, St. John's and Temple Israel, as we study together.
Shalom. See you soon.
See you soon, everyone.